Welcome everyone to our very last talk, this brain binge, which is Womenfolk and Black Folk Horror by Rhonda Jackson Joseph or Garcia. So let me introduce you to Rhonda. Rhonda Jackson Garcia, aka RJ Joseph, is an award-winning Shirley Jackson and Stoker Award-nominated Texas-based writer, speaker, and editor. Her creative and academic work examines the intersections of race, gender, and class in the horror genre and popular culture. Rhonda is an instructor at the Speculative Fiction Academy and a co-host of the genre Blackademic podcast. She has most recently been at work with Raw Dog Screening Press on their new novella line, Selected Papers from the Consortium for the Study of Anomalous Phenomena. She occasionally peeks out on various social media platforms from behind at R. Jackson Joseph or at www.rhondajacksonjoseph.com. All right, take it away, Rhonda.
Hi, I am so excited to be here. Brain Binge is always such a treat. And so, even as an attendee, I'm always very interested in seeing what everybody is working on in horror studies. And so, I am more than excited to be here to talk with you all about the women folk and Black folk horror. Um, so one of the things that I think is important to discuss up front is the idea of what folk horror is, how I am actually positing an argument here, and then examining the film characters that I want to talk about today. So the first thing that we'll do is we'll talk a little bit about Black folklore in general. Then we'll talk about folk horror, and then further narrow that down to specifically Black folk horror. And then we'll examine some very specific characters from Black folk horror movies. Fun, fun, fun. So Black folklore, what exactly is this? I always like to start these kinds of things off with, first of all, saying that Blackness is not a monolith. Okay, I am not speaking for the entire African diaspora. When I say this, I am speaking in very broad and general terms, understanding that Black experiences can cover a wide range of things. So when I talk about Black folklore and traditions, these are the things that traveled with Africans as they went throughout the globe. Through various different migration, immigration, and slavery patterns. So some of these things, when we talk about these folk tales, they're very, very important in the African tradition, in the African culture. And as a Black American who is also very Southern, one of the things that I'm particularly interested in is the way that folk tales were often told through oral means in order to pass those traditions down to for later generations. And so PA University says that one important way that folklore gets disseminated is, especially during the time of the slave trade, was the ways that African people recorded their experiences. So when you think about the things that were happening here in the Southern United States, once slavery started to commence and spread throughout the country, the enslaved people were not allowed to do very many things. They were not allowed to gather in unapproved gatherings. They were not allowed to really share information. So a lot of times they had to be very, very sneaky in how they were able to maintain the traditions and practice the things that they brought with them from the motherland. And one of those things that they used was stories. So they often retold these stories in secret. These are things that they did in order to not just maintain culture, but also to try to motivate themselves and their brethren towards hope for freedom at a future time. So the types of stories that are included in Black folklore often kind of have these types of traits. So they are origin stories. When you see stories that talk about where something came from, how did something start, where did it begin. Black folklore also likes to include comedy, life lessons. If you think about here in the South, we talk about stories like about Brer Rabbit, things that are often presented as comedic, but they offer life lessons or morals there at the end. Stories of triumph are huge. Again, these stories were started because they were supposed to maintain hope that Black people would not be enslaved into perpetuity, and that they could triumph over things that weren't going well, things that weren't happening, that weren't positive at all. And so having a bit of triumph in these stories was really important. Lots and lots of focus on ghosts and spirits and souls. This is a very, very important tenet to folklore, African folklore, that not only makes it very easy to see how horror is a nice, convenient medium to tell these stories, but also it talks a lot about the connection of spirits and ghosts to the realm of the living, and the fact that ancestors are never ever gone, that they leave this realm, but that they actually still exist on a different realm that we just can't always see. Um, and then folklore stories often talk about trickery, where sometimes there are gods or very prominent beings that have to be tricked, outwitted in order to be overcome. But again, since these stories tend to be based in hope and in triumph, the gods and goddesses, although they tend to be revered, they also are sort of dually seen as being able to be overcome, which I think is kind of important for hope. Like if you can't win, then where's the hope? So some examples of Black folklore, we have like the haint blue color that the Gullah Geechee peoples perpetuate here in the South. The idea is that the color blue painted on porches and building entrances can keep spirits, evil spirits, from crossing over that threshold. So lots of houses in the South, if you've ever traveled to Southern United States, you will see that they're still painted as this haint blue. Some of the legends say that it is because water is blue and that spirits cannot cross over water. And so water is a life-giving force, also a protective nature in a lot of Black folkloric stories. There's also the idea of the bottle tree that originated in the Congo. And this is the based on the idea that if you place blue bottles, again, the color blue, that's enticing to spirits, and evil spirits can be trapped inside of these bottles. And once they're trapped in the bottles, when the sun comes up, the sun will cause them to evaporate and disappear. Um, there's also folklore that talks about particular vampires called Asanbasams from West Africa. These are creatures that live in the forest and who will suck the life force out of people. As you can see, that would be really great to kind of keep, kids or young people from outside at night, to keep people in check, to be able to say, hey, there's these creatures out there that will do stuff to you. Um, and then there's also this base of folklore in spirits, the ancestors. Some of these spirits can be benevolent, and some of them can be malevolent. One thing that I find very interesting is the fact that some of the spirits are both, depending on the circumstances, depending on the person who is encountering them, depending on how they are appearing, depending on what the circumstances are. So that's pretty cool, I think. One of the goddesses that pops up a lot in African folklore is Mami Wata. She's a water goddess who's revered throughout Africa. And one of her gifts, one of her things that she likes to do for mortals is to take them to spiritual worlds. And so she is able to serve as sort of a spiritual guide who can let people see other things that may be coming, things that can happen. And her presence is usually discussed in terms of for people who have returned from this spiritual world under her guidance to be able to be open to new perspectives, to be able to experience prosperity. She's also sometimes seen as being malevolent in such a way that she will take over the person depending on the circumstances. So you kind of would hope that you will find favor with this particular goddess so that you would not be killed. Another god that pops up often in African folklore is Anansi. Now he is a trickster god, so he is likes to play tricks, likes to do fun things to humans. He represents a few things, mostly wisdom, knowledge. Also, he is the god of stories, which kind of makes sense because we're talking about folklore and the passing along of the knowledge through oral traditions. One thing about Anansi, though, is being a trickster god, as powerful as he is, he's often depicted in stories as being able to be overcome. So just the fact that you experience Anansi does not mean that you are looking at your doom already. It is very possible to outwit him, to outsmart him, and to be able to persevere. And so he's very powerful, but if you are also strong, you can overcome him. So, taking these ideas, I want to relate them to Black folk horror specifically. And before that, we would want to first define what folk horror is. So, Dr. Don Keatley at Lehigh University here in the United States is doing a really, really good work in studying folk horror and defining it, defining these eras of American folk horror. So, she's building on the studies of a scholar who had done something similar with British folk horror. And so Keatley came along and started kind of categorizing folk horror here in the United States. And one of the things that is kind of overarching about folk horror is an idea that comes from the folk horror revival that says that this is the belief that folk horror is a shared phenomenon. So what this means is that it folk horror exists as this sort of malleable thing that can be shaped, stretched, bent, twisted, all these things by different cultures around the world. And so this makes perfect sense that there would be a tracking of British folk horror movement in movies, and then a tracking of American folk horror movies. And the very basic thing that would come from that would be that we can further take this into different directions. All right. So the basic tenets of folk horror are you first have to have elements of folklore. So if you don't have any legends or folkloric element, things that people are bringing from tradition over and over again, then you don't really have folk horror. So you have to have the folklore in the first place. Folk horror usually takes place in these isolated landscapes. These are communities that tend to be rural when we think about things such as Midsummer or The Wicker Man. We think about isolated communities where the values in those communities are held by the community, but outside of that community, those morals are often viewed as being skewed. Okay, so as long as they stay in their bubble, in their community, everybody believes in the things that they're doing. They believe in the rituals, they believe in the folklore, they believe in the legends. But once you get outside of that community, you have outsiders who are looking in saying, there's something not quite right about this. Okay, folk horror has sacrifice, often for these legends, in order for the community to prosper or continue to exist. There must be some type of a sacrifice in the story. And this sacrifice helps to not only move the legend forward, but there's often a reward for this sacrifice that the community itself gets to have. after the ritual and sacrifice are complete. So in writing my own book about Black folk horror, I think about the horror revival saying that, hey, we can take this and make it very specific to certain cultures, right? We can make this a thing that we talk about in reference to the way that different people think about different things. And so one of the ways that I like to put this into perspective for Black folk horror specifically is that these stories tend to represent the virtues within Black communities that are of value. So again, Blackness is not a monolith. One of the things that can be valued in Black culture is the idea of redemption, the idea that there can be sacrifice, but it doesn't have to be an all-encompassing sacrifice. There's sometimes also the idea of maintaining the traditions, value, family, the ancestors, maintaining wealth within these smaller groups. Also, Black folk horror allows for the presentation of these nuanced Black experiences. Okay, so we can have Black folk horror that, like what I'm talking about here in the United States. Well, we may have Black people in the UK who will define Black folk horror as something different because of the different experiences and the different values within Black UK communities. I also think that Black folk horror offers the prospect of dismantling the fears that a lot of Black communities have, and gives us a chance to look at these fears and these goals, these hopes, through a lens of Black experiences, so that we can see how those cultures, how the people within these cultures endure, what kinds of things are shown up in the storytelling. How exactly does this get perpetuated throughout generations? Now, even more specifically, my main argument about defining Black folk horror is that Black folk horror is imbued with very, very particular cultural markers of Blackness. Okay, and that these cultural markers really do impact the way that Black people tell stories. It not only impacts the way that Black people tell stories, but it also includes the way that Black characters experience the folklore of other communities. So the actual folklore that the horror is based in does not have to necessarily be a Black community, but if there is a Black character who is experiencing that legend through their Black experiences, well, then that also is included as Black horror. And so further, Black folk horror is often rooted in the oral storytelling traditions that the diaspora has used. Um, and then also, when you talk about communities that have skewed values that are outside of the Black community, a lot of these horror stories kind of focus on the lack of agency or the desire for agency in being able to decide what happens to them. And then there's also this idea that perpetuating that legacy might require sacrifice. Okay, so this is the way that Black folk horror very specifically fits under that broader umbrella of folk horror in general. So the movies and characters that I want to talk about today are going to be these very specifically. So we're going to talk about Anne Marie McCoy from Candyman in 1992. We'll also talk about Brianna Cartwright from Candyman 2021. I want to talk about Dr. Cushing from Tales from the Hood 1995. The character of Georgina from the movie Get Out 2017, the character Lenora Chrichlow from the Horror Noire anthology. The specific episode is Bride Before You from 2021. I want to talk about Emerald Haywood from Nope 2022, and then Annie from Sinners, which just came out, and I was so excited to make that an added thing for us to talk about here. So first we'll think about Candyman, and I'll talk about these two together because they are basically the origin story and then a sort of a sequel. And so Candyman is a story about an artist who was a victim of injustice in his community. He made the dire mistake of falling in love with a white woman. And as a result of this love affair, he was killed in a very brutal way. He was attacked with bees, which it tells its own story in Black folklore. When we talk about the legend of bees and what they can do, we talk about the saying here in the South that says, "Go tell it to the bees." And so it's very important that this imagery was here in this story, that the bees are a part of telling the story, perpetuating the legend of Daniel, of this artist. And so he's actually elevated to the status of a deity in his community. Now, very interestingly, I talk with other Black scholars, my colleagues, and whenever we talk about Candyman, there's always the idea of how can we say that he was a god in the community if he was actually killing Black people in the community. He wasn't serving the purpose of a protector god. He was actually killing Black people in the community that was already wrought with poverty and crime in different negative situations. And so the thing that I like to point out about Candyman as a deity is that he was very similar to a lot of other deities in major religions, in that in order for his power to continue, in order for him to maintain his godlike status, there would be required sacrifice. And so the sacrifice of his followers in the community was a necessary requirement for his legend to continue and go on. Um, and so the community, even though there are Black people that are dying from within that same community, they're willing to keep him in existence. They're literal talking about him and warning other people, hey, beware a Candyman. Hey, don't go out at night. Hey, you got to watch out for this. If you hear the bees, you're a goner. All of this is the community being willing to still hold him in reverence through their beliefs and their practices. So the very fact that they do talk about him, that they do continue to tell his story, is what actually keeps him in existence. Candyman is shown as a representative of the whole community, of everybody that lives there. So whether they're a victim of him or not, he is their God. He's their person. Okay. And basically, he represents their fear, the fear in the community, the struggle that the community is going through, again, with poverty, with gentrification, with being erased. But also there's the idea that the community is struggling with mental illness. And these ideas of gentrification and mental illness are brought more up front in the 2021 version of Candyman, because what we see is Anthony, who is the lead character in the 2021 iteration of Candyman, is the legacy child from the 1992 version. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a few minutes. But Anthony is suffering from what appears to be mental illness. He himself has gone back to the old community, and he is living with his partner, Brianna Cartwright, in a gentrified apartment building in the old community. And so the 2021 version gives us this very interesting view of someone who was from the old neighborhood, who comes back and is actually participating actively in the erasure and gentrification of that same neighborhood. And so this is where we have the legends, the folklore. In the second iteration, Anthony ends up becoming a part of this legend himself, partially as a sacrifice, because again, you Gentrified. You actually have bought this high priced apartment that the people that already live here cannot afford to live in. He is actually perpetuating the story of Candyman through his art. And so he himself is being elevated to a godlike status because art is tangible, it is long lasting, and it is something that is representative of things that have happened in the artist's mind. It perpetuates the artist's legacy, and it kind of makes them immortal even. By the end of the movie, we see that Anthony has been made immortal in other ways also, because he is now elevated to the status of God as a different face of Candyman. So by the end, we see that he himself is also Candyman. So there are uh, women characters, the female characters in Candyman from in the 1992 version. There is Helen, who is the PhD student who kind of starts this whole journey that ends in her own death. There is her research partner who is also joining her in this inner city. Then it kind of those characters really, even though Helen is a lead character, I do feel like one of the purposes that she specifically served was that idea of an outsider trying to uh, gain something from the legacy and stories of another community. So those stories could have been better told by someone from within that community. But she took it on herself to go and seek out this legend, which led to her own demise. But the character that I want to talk more specifically about in that movie is Anne Marie McCoy. So in the 1992 version of Candyman, Anne Marie is a young mother who lives in the Cabrini Green project apartment projects, and she's working. She's trying to take care of her baby. Her baby is Anthony, and when she encounters Helen, she tells Helen, "We don't talk about Candyman. Lest you need to leave that alone. That's here inside our. We know how to deal with this. Leave it alone." Of course, Helen doesn't. And one of the things that happens because of Helen's interference is that Anthony ends up being kidnapped. All right. And so we see Anne Marie as representative of the mother that bore what we find out later is the legacy of Candyman. And so when at the end, Helen does help right before her moment of death to rescue the baby before he is sacrificed, which again, this is a part of the legend of Candyman, but the origin of Anthony as an extension of that legend. So because the baby survived, because he survived being killed in the bonfire at the end of the first movie, he lived to come back in the second movie. Another thing about Anne Marie is that I think it's really important to show that when the 2021 iteration came, Anne Marie is now a mother who has gotten more money. Her financial situation has gotten better. And so she has moved her and Anthony away from the inner city. She took him far away, thinking that maybe if she raised him up in a better place, that his fate would be better. And we do see that Anthony, I mean, he's of means. He's able to buy this really expensive apartment in the inner city. He is an artist. His art is starting to kind of gain some traction. I mean, he suffers as an artist also, though, because I mean, of course, if any of us have been artists, you kind of know the whole poor, starving artist thing is not just a stereotype a lot of times. And so she, as his mother, is thinking that she has managed to remove him from all of that. He was a baby, so he does not remember being taken into a bonfire to be sacrificed by Candyman. But as he is an adult, we start to notice that he has not been able to escape that. So apparently his legacy was tied to Candyman, regardless to what his mother did. So once we get to the 2021 version, Anthony's now an adult, and he is his partner is Brianna Cartwright. Brianna is an artistic director, so it kind of makes sense that they would meet and on shared values of art. Um, and so neither of them knows that Anthony is the legacy of Candyman, but Brianna is a part of the legend, and she is required for the perpetuation of this legend because she serves as a witness. She serves as a witness to Anthony's decline into what is perceived to be madness. She also is able to gain a work promotion to where she has more clout. She has more power in order to be able to have a bigger audience. She was the chosen witness. And so in Black folk horror, you have to have somebody there that witnesses the things that happen, because who will be left to tell the story? She easily could have been a victim of Anthony. He was in close proximity to her. He the whole time he could have killed her, but that was not her role. Her role was very important because she had to live at the end of the movie so that she could continue to tell the tale of Candyman, so that she could keep this deity up on his pedestal where he was. And then there was Tales from the Hood in 1995. This was a very fun anthology format horror story that took place in the inner city, in an LA inner city neighborhood. Now, I know we talked about folk horror as taking place in isolated locales, but it's my argument that the inner city can exist as its own type of community. Those communities are often isolated from the larger parts of the world due to financial restraints, but also because of culture. You typically live around other people that share your values. And then there are some things that happen in the inner city that if you go to the suburbs or a place more rural, they may not understand those things. So some of those morals in inner city communities can be one such as like we don't tell on our own, right? So the idea that snitches get stitches is an example of a skewed moral that happens in this isolated communities a lot of times. And so Tales from the Hood further takes place in a funeral home, very specifically, which for Black communities can be sort of a pinnacle of a place to be worshiped, right? So funeral directors and funeral homes occupy this space as leaders because they are the ones who are basically charged with crafting the afterlife for citizens, right? And so they're very important. Funeral directors tend to occupy that space of a hierarchy, like along with preachers, pastors, religious leaders, other community leaders. Not to mention that the business of death is very expensive, and so they often also tended to be financially uh, stable. So, in Tales from the Hood, the funeral director is leading three young men in. They are running in, trying to escape from a gang altercation that's happening outside the funeral home. So they go in, and the funeral director is there, passing down stories to them. So the different stories are of legends in the community, things that are happening in different households. Most of these vignettes are based on caution. So he's telling them these stories, telling them to be careful. And so he takes on the role of sort of this elder, sort of almost like a god, maybe, or someone who is the god's spokespiece, speaking piece, right? So he's saying, be careful. And this is why you want to be careful. And these vignettes also each offer redemption at some point. So these characters face a point where they can either go to their demise, or they might be able to be saved. And so it kind of depends on the choices that they make in the stories that determine which way they go. And so very particularly, I wanted to talk about Dr. Cushing from the vignette that tells the story of Crazy K. So Crazy K is a gang member, and he has been wreaking havoc in his community. He's very young, but he's been doing all kinds of stuff. He has been killing people, and these are other Black people. And so Dr. Cushing tells Jerome, which is his given name, and she very specifically calls him by his given name, because giving names and being able to name yourself is a very, very important aspect of the Black culture, very specifically because of slavery, right? When you're given a name that you didn't have any choice in. So speaking to him by his given name is very, very important here. And she basically says to him, hey, we have this revolutionary treatment that we can put you through. If you're willing to do it, you can be saved. It'll be hard. It's not going to be very easy. And I think that it's really important that she is a middle-aged Black woman, right? So this is a woman who has had some experience in the Black community. She is a doctor. So she also holds a role of leadership, and she's trying to lead Jerome to rehabilitation. So she puts him through this strenuous treatment where he is shown. He is confronted by the ghosts of the people he has killed. He has a conversation with a white supremacist who basically tells him that he is doing the job of white supremacists by helping to cull the numbers of Black people in the inner city. So Jerome goes through this treatment, but at the end, he decides that he does not want to be bothered with it. And so he ends up dying instead of being redeemed. But Dr. Cushing serves as kind of this cornerstone of not just protecting the Black community, but helping to also improve the Black community. And so Black women are often tasked with the job of protection and savior. And this is the role that I feel Dr. Cushing took in this vignette. And then there's Get Out. So Get Out, I would categorize as Black folk horror based on the fact that it centers on Chris, who is a Black man experiencing the values and morals of this affluent community and looking at it through the lens of his Blackness. So Chris is dating Rose. They go to Rose's parents' house for him to meet her parents. And the parents live in a community that has decided that, first of all, it is going to be isolated. If you have money, you have the money to put up boundaries around your home and your community. You do not have to let anyone in that you don't want to be there. And so this community is isolated, and they believe that it is perfectly acceptable to steal young, strong Black bodies and put their own souls into these bodies so that they can live forever. They use Rose as the magnet that draws young victims in. And she does this very specifically through what seems to be romantic relationships. So we watch Chris as he encounters only a couple of other Black people. It's very obvious that there's something wrong with the people that are there. He realizes this and is almost enslaved himself, but he does manage to get away from this plight. The women in this movie, Rose, first of all, is a chameleon because she brings victims in through their relationships. She often takes on the qualities that potential victim would actually be wanting to come to. So she has drawn Chris in as they're dating. They are going to be, draws him in with that happily ever after kind of thing. And then her mother is a renowned psychiatrist who does the actual, I guess, exchanging of the souls, if you will. Her mother is the enslaver because through her little teacup trick that she does, if you haven't seen it, it's really a really weird thing. You should go check that out. Through her teacup trick and hypnotizing people, this is how she serves as the slaver. This is how she serves as the person who takes the Black person's soul, buries it way deep down in the subconscious, and then she implants it with the soul that they want to inhabit that body. Um, I think that a very underrated but important character in Get Out is Georgina. She is the most prominently shown Black woman in this movie. She appears in a maid's uniform, so she's serving the family, but it is a sort of a dual definition. She's not only literally serving the family, but she is using her body is serving as host for one of the parents' mother, I think it was. And so sometimes Georgina glitches, as we're seeing here in this clip or this picture of her, because she's struggling on the inside. I think that it's very interesting that Rose brought Georgina in. There's a scene in the movie where we see the pictures of Rose with her victims, and we see her in what seems to be an intimate picture of her and Georgina. So it's really curious that Georgina is possibly queer, and that Rose used this the sometimes isolating feeling of queerness to lure Georgina in. Um, the other thing that I find very fascinating about Georgina's character is that there's this whole series of this scene where Chris is kind of spying on her, and you can see that he kind of wants her. He wants a connection with her that may not be romantic necessarily, but it seems to be him being drawn to that possible mother figure, looking to this Black woman as a potential savior to kind of help him out of his situation before he understands that she herself is actually a victim in the situation too. So, Bright Before You is a vignette that appeared in the Horror Noire anthology horror story. It is a story of racism that talks about an affluent Black doctor and his wife. They move into a new community, of course. Her husband wants a son, and so Lenore is having a hard time conceiving. So she visits a hoodoo woman, which these hoodoo women occupy a really big, elevated spiritual space in Black cultures. So if you need help, you need healing, there's going to be someone who knows the root woman who might be able to help you. So she visits the root woman for help in conceiving, and she does conceive eventually. What we see is that she has a son who grows up. What we don't see is that behind all the spooky things that happens in her home, there are groanings of the house. There's often things that happen that are starting to kind of stress Lenora out throughout the years. Her maid helps her to kind of go through this whole ordeal that ramps up when the son comes and announces his impending marriage, and he's talking about, well, I'm the firstborn. I should be able to be married. I'm marrying, I'm in and sealing the legacy. Our family will live on. But the house is not having any of it. The house gets worse and worse and worse. What we discover at the end of the story is that there is a monster hiding in one of the upstairs bedrooms. Rather than put the actual firstborn baby out, who was a dark skinned girl child, the maid and Lenore locked her up in the upstairs bedroom. So when we first see this child, she appears in a giant spider form, which is a very, very distinct callback to the idea of Anansi as a trickster, as someone as a god who can be overcome, who does these little terrible things. And so in order to free herself from the haunting and to free her daughter, we see Lenore actually go to this spider and break it open. And then the daughter herself is born as a reborn as an adult, where Lenore is freeing herself from this bondage also. So the things that are very striking about Lenore are that even though she now is in this affluent lifestyle, she has money now, she always wants to go back to her roots. She used to be a seamstress. Her husband is very dismayed when she wants to sew and do these things, because he says a woman of your standing should not be doing this. She shouldn't do that. So we're seeing that not only was her daughter being held in bondage by this monstrous spider form, but Lenora herself was also held in bondage. She experienced a very small bit of privilege because she is of a lighter complexion, but when she was unable to conceive, she was not able to cement that elevated position. And so she and her daughter both needed to be released from their bondage. And then we have sinners. Oh my goodness, the treat that is sinners. This is has just come out maybe last month, 2 months ago or so. It's now available on streaming services to rent. But this is a vampire story that talks about the journey of the smokestack twins who have had they're sort of criminals. I guess we can't sugarcoat that. Who made their money up in Chicago and ran away from the people that they took the money from, and came back to the South, to the Mississippi, to open up their own juke joint. In the course of them opening up this juke joint, we get to meet their lovers. Annie is Smoke's partner, and she is the town's hoodoo woman. We have Grace, who is shown in this picture, she and her husband Bo own two different stores in this southern town. So for this movie, fitting into Black folklore, Black folk horror, it works in various different ways, right? So first of all, there's the fact that this is a southern town. Now, this is not a talk to talk about racism as being isolated in just one little place, but I do want to talk about it as being isolated in that particular town in the South, in Mississippi at that time. Okay, so this is an isolated community. And so Grace and her husband operate two different general stores in this town. One serves white citizens, the other serves Black citizens. So when we meet the two of them, Smoke has gone into town to ask them to help them with opening up their juke joint. They need inventory. They want food. They also want Grace to make a sign for them. We also get to visit with Mary, who is Stack's ex-lover. Mary is white presenting. And so she's been able to pass as a white woman in order to secure her future. Stack thought it was best for him to rebuff her and to not claim him as her lover, but to allow her to marry into a white family so that she could reap the rewards of the status as a white woman. The problem is Mary hates him for that. She still loves him. And so we get their love story here in the vampire story also. Miles is the one of the lead characters in the story. And so the way that it also fits into folk horror is that Miles is what is called a music griot. So he is able to make music that Ellie was so wonderfully playing here as you all came in, make music that speaks to the spirits, speaks to the ancestors. Every time Miles sings or plays for someone, they are transported to a whole other place. And spirits come calling because they hear him. And this is where the vampires come into play. So Remick has his own community. He is an Irish vampire who is building a community of other vampires that he actually explains as being colorblind, as being class blind. He says, listen, everybody that has nowhere else to go, you can come be with us. But he particularly wants Miles because of his gift at speaking with the ancestors. And he wants Miles to be able to communicate with his own lost ancestors who he can no longer see because he's now a vampire. And so when we see this Black folk horror movie, we have the one community of the South, the small Southern city. We have the one community of vampirism, vampires. So these are two communities that have their own skewed morals that kind of, I mean, you know, killing people is murder is kind of wrong. And so anybody on the outside of the vampires community knows that. I mean, unless, of course, you are a part of the Klan, because then you're a part of another community that thinks that murder is okay if you keep it relegated to only Black people. You can kill Black people. And this is the actual plan for the people in Sinners. The man who sold them the juke joint plans to, it is an actual slaughterhouse. And it is his plan to go in and kill every Black person that is there. This is not how the story goes, though. As we find the vampire community is growing bigger and bigger, but by the morning we find that Miles has managed to escape with the help of Smoke. Stack, the other brother, has succumbed to the community of vampires. But what's really particular about this movie is that Miles goes on to live a very long life. He does not see his cousin Stack, a vampire, or man Mary, because they were turned in the movie. He does not see them again until he's in his old age. And even though they always knew where he was, they always followed him. There is an example of a familial bond that actually transcends the temptation of being free from racism, free from everything really, and being turned into a vampire. Stack promised Smoke that he would not harm Miles. And even though Stack was a vampire driven by bloodlust that he couldn't necessarily control, that bond of his word and that bond of his love for family made sure that he did not harm Miles. And so that in this way, the movie had a happy ending, although we would think that it didn't. It really did. And so, although there were the other women in women characters in Sinners, Grace, there was Mary, there was also and her name escapes me, Francine maybe, who was the Klansman's wife. It's very telling, though, to talk about her for just a second, that she is the one who opens their door when Remick comes. This kind of cemented her as the leader of that domestic sphere of their home. And so when he came to their house to try to seek refuge from the Cherokee vampire hunters who were giving him the blues, literally, she was the one who opened the door. And so her husband came up and said that they could welcome him in. And of course, that's how they joined the community of vampires. So her role as the domestic sphere leader was kind of a good symbol there. But I really want to talk about Annie, who I think is the most prominent female character in this story. So Annie is a hoodoo practitioner, and she and Smoke had experienced the loss of their baby daughter. Regardless of that loss, though, she is still devout and she is still faithful in her practice. We see very early on that there is a deep love between her and Smoke, despite their losses. She has prayed for his protection while he was gone away into the military. And so she is the very obvious spiritual leader, not just of their relationship, but of that whole group that is trapped in the juke joint that night facing the vampires. They very willingly, Smoke very willingly lets her take lead when she's talking to one of the other characters, Cornbread, who has been turned into a vampire. And this is because he trusts her. He trusts her spirituality, even though he himself doesn't always believe. And so Annie also was able to see her own death. So not only does she recognize that these are vampires that they're dealing with and that they have to fight, but she also sees that she's not going to make it. Rather than tell Smoke this, though, she extracts a promise from him and she says to him, listen, if I turn to a vampire, I will never see our daughter again. I will never see our ancestors again. So you have to promise me to kill me if I'm bitten. Don't let me turn. He promises her, and it does turn out that he has to actually kill her at this point because she doesn't want to turn, and he remembers his promise to her. The really important thing about that promise, though, that he kept from her was that she was able to help free him also. So rather than give in to vampirism, to be with his beloved brother, Smoke is able to avoid that, and instead, he dies at the end of his with his showdown with the clan. And again, the importance of naming. She calls him his actual name rather than Smoke. And as he is dying and he sees her holding their infant daughter, she tells him, listen, if you get rid of that smoke, if you get rid of that literal cigarette that you're holding, but if you also get rid of that persona, the gangster, the soldier that kills people, the person who is tortured, the person who is grieving his daughter's death, the person that is grieving his brother's turn to vampirism. If you give all of that up, then you can hold our baby and you can be here with us in the afterlife. And so, even though it is bloody, this movie shows hope for this Black community. Not only does Miles escape and is able to go on to live a long, fruitful life as a musician using his gift for decades, but also Smoke is able to live with his beloved Annie and their daughter in the afterlife with their ancestors. It's a very, very touching take on what could happen. That could happen, but also this legend is perpetuated. It continues to live on because Stack and Mary are now vampires. And so even though they encounter Miles in like the 1990s, we know that they are still alive. They have been alive. And so they are able to live free. They are bound by their bloodlust, but they are not enslaved anymore. And so this movie is a really welcome addition to this idea of Black folk horror. So I'm really excited about that. So in summary, why is any of this important? Well, because if we allow stories from different cultures, folklore from different cultures, legends, different cultural practices, can you imagine how much horror we could actually have an experience? Like, I know there's never a thing as too much horror. You can never have too much of it, right? And so if we think about Black folk horror as its own category of folk horror, then we can have other cultures that are able to give their own renditions of horror through their traditions and through their legends and through their legacies. And so then that gives us this broadening of the horror genre that isn't just redoing the same old ideas or recycling the same stuff. Like, we can't be tired of vampires yet because now we have an Irish vampire. We want to know all the stories of this Irish vampire. We now have, well, we don't have from Sinners. We don't have the Asian vampires because Grace made sure that she and Bo did not live in that vampiric life. So we know that they were gone on to the afterlife. But we also have these ideas as griots who talk to spirits. We can have, what if we were to have a disabled folk horror, right? If there's cultural aspects of disability, gosh, the possibilities are endless, and I'm super excited about that because vampires are not gone. We need to see them through the lens of other cultures. So thank you all so much. I want to thank Ellie and Sarah as Final Girls Berlin. They have allowed me to pontificate about women in horror, Black women in horror for the past few years. I'm really excited about the fact that their film festival endures. And I'm really, really excited about the things that Final Girls Berlin is doing. If any of you want to talk more with me about these things, I'm always happy to take your emails. You can find me on social media. Most of my handles on most of the platforms is at R Jackson Joseph. You can email me. I'm always happy to talk with everyone. So thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you so much, Rhonda. That was wonderful. And indeed, there can never be too much horror. And that was a great note to end on. Yeah, now is the time for questions. If people want to write that in the chat or turn their video on and ask themselves, yes, now's the time. I mean, there's so much that you said that made me just think and wonder and like all the possibilities. Um, I was interested in your point about ancestral spirits and how
Mm-hmm.
going back to the beginning of your presentation, and how they can both be malevolent and benevolent. And I was wondering if the films that you chose here are they kind of would there be examples of that kind of ancestral spirit in these figures, or can you think of other um, types of kind of entwined um, figures?
Oh, sure. Well, so I kind of think of the vampire that turned Remick. Remick talks about that vampire as basically colonizing him and his community. And he talks about that is how he got turned into a vampire. So I think of that spirit as a malevolent one. So whereas it was actually giving Remick freedom, because the Irish have suffered their own indignities, right? Their own different injustices and enslavement. But that vampire actually gave him a key for freedom, not freedom from the bloodlust, from that bad component, but actual freedom in that he could do whatever he wanted to do. And so I think of that original vampire, and then in turn Remick himself as a malevolent but yet benevolent spirit.
Interesting. Yeah, I guess we had another folk horror talk this weekend, and I've just been thinking about the idea of the category of folk horror and like
Mm-hmm.
how fluid it is or not, like it seems
Right.
you kind of yeah tailor it in some ways. And I'm wondering what your thoughts on that are like how productive is the term folk horror for you, and like where do you feel like it's the limitations? Where do you feel like maybe this is totally not could never be a folk horror? Um,
Can I add to the
Yeah. Well,
question before?
oh, sorry, Sarah, go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to jump onto it before your answer, which was that
yeah.
both you and the speaker yesterday, whose name is unfortunately escaping me right now,
Laura Cannon, yeah.
Laura, yes,
Mm-hmm.
both talked about isolation in new ways, actually. 'Cause
Uh-huh.
I was
Right.
very interested in your point about urban inner city as an isolated community, although it's in the midst of,
Right.
populous urban landscape. And then she was talking about women just experiencing isolation
Mm-hmm.
amidst like the gaslighting of their family or partner who are not confronting reality.
Yes.
So it would have been an interesting conversation between you actually regarding these new approaches to isolation. But yes, anyway, just wanted to jump onto the question for a second. But yes,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
definition.
I cannot wait until you all release like the recordings, because I couldn't go to that one, and I really want to see that one also. But yeah, I think that folk horror is one of these categories that just has a whole lot of potential. And so that's one of the ways, is that when we think about isolation, there are different ways to talk about isolation. So like for instance, I am a middle-aged woman who is dealing with perimenopause right now. And so the symptoms, the ways that this thing can be so debilitating sometimes, it serves as its own isolation. So like there are times when I'm finding that I'm not able to like participate at work, where I'm holed up in my office because these symptoms are just so terrible. We can talk about mental illness as being debilitating, as being isolating. We talk about class as being isolating, right? Like just like this affluent community in Get Out can do. I know the communities down home where I'm from, Houston, Texas, they have there's this one community I'm thinking about, affluent. They have literally gotten the city. They made their own little township in the middle of Houston, And they literally got their little township to build up these brick walls around their neighborhood. And so you think about, you can, and they blocked off the roads. So if you don't live there, you can't just go trailing through their neighborhood. And so when we think about isolation, they have effectively isolated themselves. And so I think that to what Ellie talked about, as far as like at what point do we just say, well, no, not well, everything is just folk horror. Well, no, I don't think that everything will be, simply because it still must have these tenets. There's the ideas that not only is this community isolated, but those morals have to be skewed, right? So there has to be something about the morals in that community. And again, speaking as a middle-aged woman going through perimenopause, I belong to a lot of forums where women my age are talking about feeling very murdery, right? They talk about the rage, they talk about the invisibility. And so these are morals that if we were to just say, well, hey, let's just all go out and do some murder. Let's just go out and take out our rage on somebody else. Well, those are morals that for our community, they seem like they make perfect sense while we're talking to each other. But like in the wider world, people would look at us and go, no, no, you can't do that. So I think that as long as these other tenants are present, as long as they're isolated, we have the morals are skewed, as long as there is some type of sacrifice, as long as there is a sort of an offer for redemption. This is not always the way that horror stories are told. And so that means I think that we'll always be able to look at ones and find that there are categories that these are folk horror and these are not.
Yeah, right. John Ann, did you have a question? Do you want to turn your video on, or maybe? Yes.
Technical difficulties. You hear me, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, actually, that was the question. So first, thank you very much for the talk. Folk horror is really my personal favorite amongst many,
Nice.
but yeah, folk horror is my favorite. And I want to share an observation because this was really interesting, your point of view and your presentation of folk horror, because I don't know, I saw a lot of presentations or talks or whatever, and there is really the great difference is that your presentation is about folk horror and about these kind of, I say demons right now, I just use the word, but it's bright. It's your presentation and what you're talking about. Even if you talk about the figures and the ghosts and whatever, it's like I had the impression that you can see folk horror as a kind of curse, and it's bad for you in a way because of the sacrifice and the pressure from the group or whatever. But you introduced it in a way that it's helpful. And it's I don't know, is it the right impression? Because it's folk horror, and not as you don't have to fear it, you can use it. I don't know.
Sure. Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm so glad that you like folk horror, first of all, and that you came out to see this. But yeah, I don't think that I believe that because the folk horror is based on the community's ideals, that there are times when, for instance, as a creator, right? So I write horror also. And as a creator, I'm also always thinking about ways that people from marginalized groups can experience freedom and agency. And one way that you can experience agency is through monstrosity. So if you are the monster, then you are free to do things. It's harder for people to trap you. It's harder for them to keep you in bondage. It does come with some downsides. I mean, that's not to say that. I mean, I may or may not be willing to turn into a vampire if that were real. I mean, we'll not talk about that. But I mean, but the overarching idea is that sometimes these folkloric legends, they are useful to the community. the stories are very important. I know that in academia, there's been this hesitance to accept oral storytelling as actual record keeping. And I'm glad that a lot of academics, especially ones that study Black cultures, are starting to understand that if you discount those oral histories, we don't have any record of this stuff. Right. And so those traditions are very important. And I don't think that they always have to be an ends to an evil means. But I mean, we are talking about horror here. And so, yes, evil things happen in horror. That's kind of how it goes. So I'm really, really glad and excited that you see the potential for these types of stories and in folk horror itself.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you very much. And even horror can be a chance to cope with things. I think that's the point why we are here.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Shannon. As a huge fan of Candyman, just as Candyman, also RIP Tony Todd. Um,
Yes.
I was wondering what you thought just generally of the racial politics, let's say, of the 92 version and the 2021 version, if you can kind of like talk about that more. You did
Oh my
kind of, but
goodness. So
yeah.
yeah, so when the 92 version came out, I myself was a young adult, right? So I hadn't really done a lot of gender studies, but I did grow up in an inner city. And one of the things that I remember being rather incensed about was the fact that this doctoral student, who was this, affluent white woman, just kind of bouldered into this community and thought that that was okay. Right. And I thought, on the one hand, I was excited that she was a woman, first of all, even pursuing doctoral studies. So I kind of had this ambivalent, this kind of dual feeling, right? I was like, well, on the one hand, I'm glad that she's a woman, but on the other hand, kind of read the room. Like, don't come in here doing that. But then I thought about my own education in the inner city. There were teachers who thought they were coming in, they were wanting to save the world, and then they actually got worn down really fast, unfortunately, because I think they started to realize that there's more to in helping the inner city or bringing light to the plights therein than what they thought. And so I think that the racial politics in the first one were very relegated to just that whole class dynamic, but also the race dynamic. I thought it was curious that Helen was a girl, because I thought, would they have put a white man in that position to have sacrificed himself at the end that way? And so she almost had to be a female character for that part to work out. But then when we get to the 2021 iteration, I was very struck by that one art critic, right? That art critic and the art gallery guy, who they were pressing Anthony. They're saying your work is not that great, and you need to be more commercial, and they were trying to mold him into what they wanted him to be. And I feel like that only happens when you have artists from marginalized groups, right? So you have the powers that be and the gatekeepers or whatnot, the people who are saying, you need to make your art palatable for people to consume it, as opposed to let us take you on your own merits. And so I feel like that iteration seemed to focus a little more on class dynamics, seeing as how he and Brianna lived in this huge, I mean, like, as you go to the inner cities now and you see these like multi-million-dollar townhomes, and right next to them are these like row houses, right? And so I think that I really like how 2021 started to bring class into the conversation, because race is a thing, but class is also a thing. It's also a divider. And so, yeah, I think that it's curious how they both did the same thing, but they took different avenues to it.
Yeah. Any more questions from
I have a question.
yes,
I was I was super fascinated by this part about names, um,
Hmm.
about being given names and choosing your own name, and the historical relevance of this. And
Yeah.
I don't remember if you discussed it in relation to Candyman because my brain is exhausted at the end of the day. But I was wondering if you want, because of this, the naming of Candyman is so essential to
Hmm.
his summoning. Uh,
Yes.
yeah, there was something I was wondering. I mean, yeah, it's just a loose thread in my head right now, but I'd be curious to know if you have any thoughts about that or other
Yeah.
examples that you
Yeah.
go into. Yeah.
So I didn't touch on it in talking about Candyman, but you're absolutely right. Like in my book, I talk more about how the actual oral evocation of him. This is how he comes to be. You have to talk about him. You have to name him. You have to call on him very specifically. So you're right. Like that idea that your name is the power. Now, he's not the one that actually gave himself that name, but it is the one that he as a deity chose to answer to. So it sort of is his chosen name. But you're absolutely right. The idea that you have to call on a person's name, the name that they answer to, the name that they choose, in order to tap into their power, in order to call on them. That's a great observation. I love that. So I do talk a lot more about it.
Well, yeah, I'm now I'm gonna be thinking about it in other contexts and other works as well now. Um,
Yeah, sure.
I had another question about this quote that you had in one of your slides about the folk horror
Hmm.
revival, shared but individually shaped by all cultures around the world.
Hmm.
Um, I'm curious about this shared element as well, and about where, um, like when let me try to think of how to word this. Like what is it about appropriations of other cultures' folk tales in the context of folk horror and like when yeah just this whole element
Hmm.
of shared but individually shaped yeah it got me thinking about like what can go wrong there maybe or like if you have any examples of like confusing or like con what's like conflated folk tales or something like this, if you have thoughts about that.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So when I think about shared ideals, I guess I'm thinking about more like human experiences. Like most communities, they want certain things, right? They want prosperity. They want to be able to feed their kids. They want to be able to live long. They want to be able to be left alone, right? They want to be able to do the things that they want to do. But as you go from community to community, these human wants and desires, they're shaped by what that community has endured, what the community practices. And so I found just so wonderful about Sinners. I mean, there's so much to love, everything about the movie, but the fact that it showed two separate communities, right? And so when you think about the vampires like Remick, oh my gosh, as comedic relief was hilarious. But how when they asked him when he was trying to get into the juke joint, he's like, "Are y'all clan?" He was so offended. He's like, "Oh no, like I do not believe in subjugating people based on their skin color, right?" I mean, he's all like, "Not even I would be a clan member. They are terrible. That's terrible, right?" But at the same time, so he's like, racism is bad, murder's cool, not the racism thing. Like, no, we're against that too. So in his little vampiric community, he actually was playing on that idea of freedom, that idea of agency, that idea even of prosperity, because that's how he got the Klansman and his wife, was through the idea of shared. We want to be able to be free to act on our beliefs, even though I don't share your beliefs. That's how I'm going to get you to let me in your house, right? I'm going to paint the indigenous people as enemies, and that's something that we share. But in our communities, we want different things, but we want overall the same things. We just want to be free. We want to eat. We want to reproduce. The vampires want to do that, but also this southern town, that's what they want to do. So, and as far as appropriation, I could see that the human experience is already tied together in so many ways, and so I think that there's going to be different values co-opted the same way that Remick co-opted the idea of wanting freedom and agency for his own community. But speaking in broader terms, I think that the human experience, we all share basically the same desires in the long run.
Well, thank you for that clarification. I understand better now what the quote was referring to. Appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you for such wonderful questions.
I took so
Uh,
many notes because I had so much fun listening to your presentation.
Excellent.
If you don't mind, I'll just talk about one more thing I took notes on, Ellie, before
Yeah, sure, yes.
before we close things down. This part about the witness being an essential part of folklore and folk
Hmm.
horror, and then specifically the funeral director passing down stories. I thought that was super fascinating, and I'm wondering if there's other figures or other examples of this in terms of like horror figures who have this potential as witnesses in some sense, like who are kind of in these more shadowy realms of society, but are essential for this storytelling.
So I think what comes to mind immediately is that latest iteration of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre that Netflix did. I think it's been a couple of years or so now. I can't remember the year, but this is the one where there was the group of young business owners and investors. They had bought like all this property in that small town. And then there was a resident that was there that they found out later that they actually didn't own her home, but they put her out of her home and she died. That's why Leatherface came to get everybody. Well, like the protagonist in that iteration was a young person who had actually lived through a school shooting, was experiencing PTSD as a result. But you see at the end where this character goes against one of the original cast members, Sarah, who must have been from like the boomer generation. So you see this thing about the boomer generation, and then you have Generation Z, and they both make it almost to the end of the movie, but the boomer is going to just go in with her guns blazing. She ends up getting killed, right? But the Gen Z protagonist survived the ordeal with Leatherface, mostly because of the experiences from the school shooting, but she lived to tell the story that happened there in that town. So she was able to go on later and say, I would assume that if there was ever like a sequel where she'd be like, listen, I was there. The shooting people with the gun, that didn't help, but we were gentrifying their little town anyway, and we were wrong anyway. But like, look, I live to tell the story. I need to tell y'all about Leatherface. Don't go into Leatherface's town trying to steal his mama's house, right? And so I think that also in Demon Knight, from the 90s. Jada Pinkett Smith's character was one of those final girls that you kind of almost think, well, she obviously she wasn't rich, she wasn't from the right side of the tracks, but she survived that story, and she went on to be the person who was like the keeper of that vial to keep the devil away. And so she lived to tell the story. She witnessed everything that the devil was able to do. She witnessed different strengths and different weaknesses. And so she was able to go on from there on her own journeys in trying to be able to protect other people. So I would think that Final Girls almost fit into this. If the story is a folk horror, then any Final Girl that follows that ends up from that would probably be that witness character.
And now I'm reminded of the panel that you were on a few years ago. Do you remember one of the other panelists gave a talk about enduring women, and these were black
Yes.
girls?
Yes, 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 yes. I use that film in class. I use that recording in class a lot of times because I like for my students when they're crafting their own academic presentations to understand what this might look like when you get to the Q&A, the presentation itself, the questions people can ask. So yes, that was a fun time. Y'all know how to throw a party.
that's great. That's good to know. Um,
The
you were
enduring woman is also a nice, yeah, sorry, but go ahead, Ellie.
no, please.
I wasn't sure if you had another question, so I was going to say enduring woman's a great note to end on, but it's not, we're not ending, so I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Almost. I just wanted to I guess promote you a little bit because you were mentioning also that you're obviously a writer and you also mentioned this a bit in the presentation. I'm wondering, yeah, are you working on something right now, and also specifically with folk horror in mind? Is there anything that we might find of yours in that realm?
Oh, absolutely. So I do my horror collection is out. So it was published a couple of years ago. Hell Hath No Sorrow Like a Woman Haunted. They're none. The stories don't necessarily center on folk horror, but my agent is literally shopping around right now my proposal for a book on black folk horror, right? And so that's where a lot of the points in this presentation came from. It's like I read a whole presentation, a whole proposal about this thing. And so that is specifically going to talk about Black folk horror. But I also have that she's going to be shopping around in a few months, a folk horror story about a novella about a community that has these ideas of how to be prosperous that the rest of us don't think would be so great.
Nice. Well, yeah, please let us know. And we can also like share that in our social media or wherever.
Oh,
So
sure, absolutely.
yeah,
Thank
yeah,
you. I'd be glad to do that. Thank you. I appreciate
yeah,
it.
of course. Yes, so now I think it's time to say goodbye to all this. Thank you all for being here, especially those who were here the whole time. And yeah, we're happy to do this every year. And yeah, I mean, we also, this is all free, of course, but if you feel like donating, please do. We have a PayPal. That's also in our link tree or wherever. And yeah, thank you again, Rhonda. Thank you, Sarah, for doing this with me.
Really. And thank you,
Yeah.
Rhonda. I had so much fun listening to your talk, and I can't wait to watch it again so that I can look into those references as well from yeah, these historical and folklore references that you brought into the conversation. So
Yeah, so
it's
thank you all for having me. Such a good time.
All right, everyone. Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.